In this video, we're going to talk about factoring by grouping, and we're going to take a look at when this is advisable. So when we take a look at four terms, it's often easy to factor this by grouping two terms at a time. So if we start out, for instance, with x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 6, we can group the first two terms and we can group the last two terms. So the greatest common factor that can be pulled out of the first parentheses is going to be x. So when we pull our x out, what's left? Well, that's going to be an x plus 2. Then in our second parentheses, the greatest common factor would be a 3. We pull that out, we're left with an x plus 2. So now our greatest common factor here is x plus 2. So we have two things. Remember, things are separated by pluses and minuses. So out of there, we'll pull out our x plus 2. And what's left? Well, what's left is x plus 3. So you see, when we cancel out the x plus 2's that we've pulled out, it's pretty obvious what's left, x plus 3. So let's try another one of those. So if we start out with x squared plus 4x minus 3x minus 12. Okay, so now let's go ahead and group the first two, and you'll notice between the last two here we have a minus sign. So I'm going to pull out that minus sign here, and then that's going to change the sign in front of the 12 to a minus. So our greatest common factor here in our first parentheses would be x, and when we pull out our x, we're left with x plus 4. And then in our last parentheses, we can pull out a 3, and that's going to leave us, once again, x plus 4. Our greatest common factor then would be the x plus 4. So we pull out x plus 4, and we're left with x minus 3. Okay, so let's try another one. So if we had 2x squared minus 8x minus 3x plus 12. Okay. So once again, we have a minus sign here in front of our third term. So let's go ahead and put that minus sign out here. And inside our parentheses, we'll have a positive 3x, but we'll have to make this a negative 12. Our first parentheses is okay. So let's factor out our common factor, which would be 2x, and that's going to leave us x minus 4. Then we can factor out a 3 out of our second parentheses, and that leaves us also an x minus 4. Our common factor, once again, is what's inside the parentheses. So when we factor that out, we're going to have x minus 4 times 2x minus 3. Okay, and let's try another one. So if we had 3x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 2, so you'll notice our third term is positive, so that makes my life a lot easier. So we have that positive sign there. That means it doesn't change anything inside the second parentheses. So let's factor out our common term out of our first parentheses. So our first common term is 3x, and that leaves us x minus 1. And out of our second parentheses, we can factor out a 2, and that leaves us, once again, x minus 1. So our x minus 1 is our common factor. So that's going to give us x minus 1 times 3x plus 2. So let's take another example here. So let's say that we had 6x squared plus 6x plus 3x plus 3. Let's see if we can factor that. So let's go ahead and group it. So out of our first parentheses, we can pull out a 6x, and that's going to leave us x plus 1. And out of our second parentheses, we can pull out a 3, and that's going to leave us x plus 1. So our greatest common factor here would be x plus 1. And that leaves us 6x plus 3. But now I noticed I could have factored out a common factor because I can now factor something out of the 6x plus 3. So I can factor a 3 out of there. So let's factor the 3 out of that, and that'll leave us 2x plus 1. Go ahead and bring down our x plus 1. We'll put a parentheses here around the 3, and it probably looks better if we just bring it out to the front. So we'd have 3 times x plus 1 times 2x plus 1. So we just factored that, as they say, completely. So there's a quick look at factoring by grouping when we have 4 terms. Thank you for watching.